Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Lamed. Today's stuff is sponsored by Deborah Hoffman-Wade in loving memory of Simcha Collins on her first year at site. Beloved scholar, romantic, and deep searcher, her love of Torah was not even closely satisfied by our twice weekly meeting to study and learn. My chavruta of many years, Simcha had a deep need to turn Torah, to be fiercely feminist, and have a multi-layered mystic belief in Hashem. I miss you every day. Okay, we're going to get started now with our daf. We started yesterday with a long breita that we're still dealing with, which about a shor tam shizik versus a shor muad, and we dealt with different stages. And what if the animal, remember, because the animal in the shor tam, the animal that damaged, actually is liened to the payment of the debt, of the damage, whereas in a shor muad it's not. So there was a whole question of what if the person who my ox damage, Ruth's ox damages, and Ruth sells her shor. At what stage? Before the judgment, after the judgment? Is it a valid sale? Is it not a valid sale? She sanctifies it. Is it valid? Is it not? What if it was liened to a different loan, right? And then the creditors come and take it. Do they get to keep it or not? So we talked all about that. And then we're going to go into each of the cases. So in the meantime, we were on this tangent where we basically said that from here you can learn about pchat shchita, that if the animal decreases, because it said in there that if you slaughter the animal, if Ruth decides to slaughter her animal before the judgment, then it's done. So what does it mean it's done? It's still the animal has to go to Naomi to pay for the damages. But what do we say? I'm a Rav Huna B'reit Rav Yoshua, right? It's lepchat shchita. What it means is, before we get to that, what it means is that if it goes down in value, Ruth actually ends up paying less. Because if she slaughters the animal's now worth less, well, tough luck on Naomi, which is strange, right? And Rav Huna comes and says, from here you'll learn that anyone who damages something that was liened, if it was liened to pay back something, and that was what was supposed to be paying back, whatever it was, and you damage it, you're actually exempt, because here she slaughtered it, Ruth, slaughtered her ox, which was designated as the payment for Naomi, and Naomi's going to lose out because now it's worth less. To which they said, isn't that obvious? To which they said, no, well, maybe you could say it just took out the life spirit. There was nothing really tangible there. Maybe that's why, but it wouldn't necessarily apply if you did something tangible like dig pits, right, in a field. Then they said, but Rabba also said that if you burn someone's documents and their IOUs, you're actually exempt. And there you're doing something actually physical. You're burning documents. I said, oh, well, maybe that's just paper. By the way, I looked up that law a little bit more in depth. It seems there's a machloket about this, and we don't actually hold this way. So by the way, just so you know, because it's a very strange halacha. If I burn your IOUs, there's a big machloket. Is this grama? Is it garme? We're going to see this case more in depth later. But just know that there is a debate about this, and it's paskin la halacha that actually you are liable for the fact that you burn someone's documents. But here they're basically saying it's the same thing that Rabba says, and they say, oh, maybe that's just paper, but maybe digging pits and doing something actually really physical that causes damage, maybe you'd be liable. And that's why Rav Huna needs to come and say, no. This sets the example for every case of lien property. Okay, that's what we got up to. Now we're going to start with 3 lines from the bottom. Kadmu ba'alei chovot v'igbiu. Now we're going to talk about the case of if somebody comes and takes lien property. Okay, they take this animal that was liened to their loan, and they take it in payment, but also the animal is now liened to Naomi because Ruth's ox damaged Naomi, and Ruth's ox now is supposed to be going to Naomi. So the Brighthead said, if the Baalei Chovot came and higbiu, and they actually took it already before Naomi got paid, bein chavat shelo izik, bein izik ad shelo chav, lo asav lo klum. It doesn't matter if the lien on the ox was before, if the loan happened before the damage, or first Ruth's ox damaged Naomi, and then Ruth took out a loan and this animal was liened to the loan. Doesn't matter. No matter what, this animal is Naomi's. And when the creditors seize the animal, it's a useless act. Because that ox is Naomi's, okay? That's how we pay. Shor tam pays from the animal itself, the damage. So now the Gemara wants to understand this better. That was just a quote from the Breita. Bishlama, and as you follow, we quoted this Breita, and then we just started going one by one down all the cases, which is something we're going to do later today with other Breita. Bishlama hizigat shalochav. Nizak in kadmu. We understand if the damage happened first and then the loan, because the creditor was a later creditor. always there's order of precedence. The early creditors always get first dibs. But if first it was lien to a loan, then they should get it first, right? The creditor. And even forget about the order. Even let's say the damage happened first, and then the creditor was owed the money later. Still, Baal Chov Kadin. In this case, now what did it say? If the Baal Chov grabbed it, it's meaningless. But we have a rule. Baal Chov should be Kodem. Why? Not that he really gets first priority, but if the creditor already came and seized the property, or in this case, the animal, we can't take it away from him. How do we know? Well, according to this, it sounds like we could take it away from him. Now, this would lead to something that we know is not the case. So let's make a comparison. If, let's say, let's see Ruth took out a loan. Okay, she took out a loan in January. She took out a loan in February. She took out a loan in March. So now, January person has first dibs, then February, then March. However, if the March person came and already took property before January and February person came, actually, once they seize it, it's theirs. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Shema mina. Sounds like from here that would be the opposite. The Baal Chov Me'uchal shekadam v'gava, ma shegava lo gava. It would sound like a later Baal Chov that comes and seizes property in payment for the loan. Whatever they took is irrelevant because January person has precedence and February person has precedence. And that is actually not the case. Once they seize it, they keep it. So how does that work in with this? This sounds like if they seized it, even if they were owed the money last, they still, right? Or even if they were owed the money first, right? Sorry, it's specifically if they owe the money, if Naomi got damaged first, so that would mean that if someone came who was owed later, well, we remove her from their possession, and that's not the case. We know the halacha is that even if the March person comes and takes the property, we don't take it out of their hands to give to January person. So this is all a law of once you have something, we view it differently than we won't give it to the March guy first. But if the March person comes and collects already, it's too late. It's done. It's done. To which the Gemara says, no. No, really, it really is. Okay, if March creditor comes first, they get to keep it. But in this case, it's different. Why is it different in this case? It's a unique case because Naomi can go and say to Ruth, or say actually to the person who seized it, the creditor, or to Ruth, she can go and say to Ruth, if the shor was by you, I would be collecting from that shor. And therefore, because this is a unique halacha. This isn't like a regular creditor. Naomi is not a creditor that has a property lien to her. If we just talk about a lien, that's something different, okay? A lien, yes, there's an order of who gets what. However, if the order is messed up and someone comes along and claims, they get to keep it. But in this case, if the damage happened first, or even if the damage didn't happen first, but if the damage happened first and the creditor comes and seizes it, they don't get to keep it, like in a regular case of creditors and lien property. Because Naomi can always say, this ox is mine, basically, right? I have full rights to this ox because this ox damaged my property, and therefore I could collect from this ox, and no creditor really gets to keep that ox, okay? And that's because of the Torah law, that it goes migufo. And therefore that one-ups anything else. Okay, so basically you can't learn laws of regular creditors from here because this isn't a regular case. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have a braita with another case, and we're going to have 4 parameters here. It's going to split into 2. Something happens to the damaged person's ox in between the time of the damage and the time of the payment, and something happens to the mazik, the owner of the shor who's still alive, the one who damaged. Also, we're going to have a fluctuation in the value. Okay, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. We're going to have, what if the one who was damaged goes up in value or goes down in value? What if the one who damaged goes up in value, goes down in value? So let's see. Shor shaveh 200. Shenagach, shor shaveh 200. So we have a 200, excuse me. We have a 200 value shor and we have a 200 value shor. Both of them are the same value. But the damage done is 50 zuz worth of damage. Vishavach va'amad al 400 zuz. But what happens in between the time? So the damage was done. The shor that was 200 goes down to 150. So let's go back to Ruth and Naomi. Naomi, first we're going to talk about Naomi, the one who was damaged. Naomi's ox jumps down from 200 to 150. 50 zuz worth of damage. Now, then Shavach va'amad al 400 zuz. Somehow, we don't know how, but we'll talk about it soon maybe, but the animal goes up in value. Okay, gets damaged, seems to be probably even still alive maybe, and now starts going up in value. Okay, the ox gets stronger and stronger and stronger and bigger. Time elapses between the time they go to do the payment. The time of the payment, the shor is worth double what it was worth before the damage happened. So now Ruth wants to say, I don't need to pay you. You're sure I didn't devalue it at all because look, it's now worth 400 zuz. But of course she has to pay the 50 because ilmale lo iziku haya omed al 800 zuz. Were it not that you had damaged, it would have gone up 800 zuz. Okay, in other words, you made it weaker and then it got stronger, but think of how much stronger it would have gotten had you not damaged it. So of course you have to pay the 50. And therefore, notain kishat hanesek. And that's the rule. You pay according to what the damage was at the time of the goring. Okay? Because even if it went up in value, right, that doesn't matter. Tachash, if the animal went down in value, okay, Naomi's animal decreases in value. So she starts at 150, right? She starts at 200, goes down to 150 at the time of damage, and then drops down to 100 by the time they get to court. Well, kishat hamadabadin. Then Ruth has to pay 100 worths of damage, okay, which will be half of it, but it's assessed, the damage is assessed at 100. We're going to have to get to what the case is and why this is, okay? We'll talk about it soon. Shavach mazik. What if Ruth's ox went up in value? So, right, she only has to pay, remember, half damages from the body of the animal. But what if the body of the animal goes up in value? No tein lo kishat hanesek. It doesn't matter that it went up in value. You still only pay up to the amount of the animal, the value of the animal was at the time it caused damage. Kachash, we don't really understand the reason for all this yet. We're going to get into this in the Gemara, so don't worry. Kachash, if Ruth's animal goes down in value, kishat hamadabadin. So in both of these cases, we're going to have a difference between if it went up or if it went down and which moment we assess it, from the time of the damage or from the time it goes to court, right? So now let's see. We're going to start with the end, with Ruth's animal. So Amar, Shavach mazik, if Ruth's animal goes up in value, notain kishat hanesek. Now, according to who does this go? And this is a question. We're going to start with a big question on this. This bright doesn't really make any sense. Okay, if you didn't think it made sense, it doesn't really make sense. Because minei, Rabbi Yishmael. Now, if Ruth's animal goes up in value, okay, then we don't care. Naomi doesn't get any more. Why? Because Naomi has no rights to that animal, right? Now, that would have to be Rabbi Yishmael. Let's go back to the machloket, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael said, it's just that Ruth owes money to Naomi, but it's not that she owes her shor, right? She owes money. The Beit Din assesses how much money, so we assess it based on the time of damages. Doesn't matter if Ruth's animal ultimately goes up in value. That's irrelevant. Right? It's just Naomi's like a creditor. She's just owed money. So what's the relevance whether Ruth's ox goes up in value or not from the time of the action? We go by the time of the act. But but when it says in the second line, which is really the fourth line, right? The second line of the second part, if Ruth's ox goes down in value, then we go by the value of Ruth's ox at the time of the payment. Now that sounds like Rabbi Akiva, because why should that have anything to do with the nizak, with Naomi? Because the shor is hers basically. She can only get paid as much as the value of that ox. If that ox went down in value and now is valued at less, well, she's going to lose out because she's like a partner in the ox from the time of the act. So basically, she's going to lose out. That goes like Rabbi Akiva. So Reisha Rabbi Yishmael, V'Sefer Rabbi Akiva. It doesn't make sense that same line, the first part would be Rabbi Yishmael's approach, and the second line would be Rabbi Akiva's approach. Something doesn't make sense here at all. To which they answer, "Lo kula Rabbi Akiva." We can actually explain this entire bright like Rabbi Akiva. How so? Well, what we really have to explain is the Reisha, because if the animal went up in value, according to Rabbi Akiva, Naomi was a partner in that animal and she should get the value that it went up in, she should get the increased value. So they say, why doesn't she get the increased value? Because it's actually talking about a case. Why did Ruth's animal go up in value? Well, the reason would be kishe pitmo would only be if Ruth invested in feeding the animal good food to help them grow and doing other things that made the animal go up in value. Ruth invested in the animal. In other words, the accident happened in January. In February, Ruth invested in the animal. The case got to court in March. By the time March came along, the animal was worth a lot more, but it was worth more because Ruth invested. So that doesn't go to Naomi. Okay, it makes sense. To which the Gemara says, okay, wait. If you're going to say that shavach we have 4 cases, remember? Splits into 2 of the nizak, going up, going down, 2 of the mazik, going up, going down, right? Naomi's animal going up, going down in value, or Ruth's animal going up and down in value. If you're going to say that when Ruth's animal goes up in value, Naomi doesn't get to benefit because Ruth invested in it, then you're going to have to go to the first part. And when it said Naomi's ox goes up in value, is going to be when Naomi invested in. Now let's fit that in there and see if it, fill that in, see if it works. Because we're going to assume when it says shavach, it's got to be the same in the first part and the second part. So ikashipitmo, if it's that they fattened up the animal. So now let's go to the beginning. Ema Resha, if Naomi fattened up her animal and shavach, and now it's worth 400 because Naomi fattened up her injured animal and she spent a lot of money investing in it for it to go up in value. So what's the halacha? Notein lo kishat nezek. So again, even though the animal went up in value because Naomi invested in it, Ruth still has to pay based on what it was at the time of the event. Now that would be true. That would be right. Except it's so right that Iba Shabitmu Sricha L'Meimar. You obviously don't need to say that. If Ruth injured Naomi's animal, and then Naomi over time invested in her animal's worth a lot more, Ruth can't come and say, oh, look, your animal's worth a lot more because you invested in it, I'm not paying you damages. You don't need a brighter to tell us that. It's obvious that if Naomi invested in her animal and the animal's worth more, Ruth obviously still has to pay for the value it was at the time it was injured. So that wouldn't make any sense to read the brighter that way. So if you can't read the first part that way, you can't read the second part that way. To which Rav Papa is going to answer, well, I have a good answer. He said, I'm Rav Papa. Now, what did we say? The problem with the Reisha is not that it's not true. It is true. It's just totally unnecessary. To which they say, no, what they want to say is, if Naomi's animal went up, Ruth still has to pay the amount it was. Now, in that case, there's 2 possibilities. Either because it went up because she fattened up the animal, which is really unnecessary to say. But it's also true if the animal just happened to get strong on their own and go up in value. Okay, they don't seem to. I saw you wrote before in the chat about the market value changing. Most people, and I didn't get into this, but most people say we're not talking about a fluctuation in market value. That would be something else. But we're talking about more that the animal actually increases in value. So if the animal increases in value, whether it was on its own or whether it was because Naomi invested, either which way, Ruth still has to pay based on the damage she caused at the time and whatever the price was at that moment. And the real chidush is even if it went up on its own. But it was really talking about both cases, which then makes it easier to say that the seifa, the second part though, lo mishkachala ela kishapitmo. So the first is in 2 scenarios, happened on its own or Naomi fattened it up, which again, that second part was obvious, but yes, still true. So the second part, when it says Ruth's animal went up in value, then we're going to say Naomi gets nothing of that, even though Rabbi Akiva says really the animal is Naomi's, because it's only in a case where Ruth actually invested in it. And that's the reason why. Okay, so that explains that part. Now we're going to go back to the first part about Naomi's ox decreasing in value. And what did it say? Naomi's ox goes down in value, kachash, kishat hamada b'din. Then we do it based on what it's worth at the time that they need to pay. So again, at the time of damage, it was damaged only 50. It went down from 200 to 100. But by the time Ruth goes to pay, it goes down to 100. And basically Ruth has to pay that difference. So the question is why? And what caused, again, just like we have what caused the animal to go up in value, what caused the animal to go down in value that we're going to make Ruth compensate her for it? It's going to be kind of obvious, but kachash machmat mai. Ilema de kachsha machmat malacha. If it's that in the meantime, Naomi was, remember, the animal went down 50, but it was still worth something. It still could work. So Naomi works the animal, and because she works the animal goes down in value. It gets weaker. Well, if that's the case, Ruth can say, if in January she injured the animal, right? Ruth's ox injures Naomi's ox. And then Naomi works the animal the whole month of January and it gets much weaker. Ruth can say, okay, you worked your animal, you got benefit from your animal. As a result, your animal's weaker. You're going to make me pay for that. It has nothing to do with me. So it can't possibly be that. So Amar Rav Ashi, dekachash machmat maka, da'amar le karna de Torah kvi Rabbi. Basically, what Naomi's going to say is, or the case is, where the animal got weaker because, okay, this unfortunately is very relevant now. We have a lot of injured soldiers in the hospital, and some of them, right, get better, and some of them, the situation deteriorates. If you would assess the damage on day number 1, it would be X, but it could be by the end of week 1, it actually is worse. And that is on account of what happened originally. It's not that they just happen to get weaker for random reasons. No, they get weaker because of the original injury. So if you assess the damage later, and it's from the damage really, that the animal decreased in value, then of course Ruth's going to have to compensate for that because it was part of the original from the makah. And then, now, again, it's a little hard to prove, but Naomi can say, the horn of your animal is buried in the body of my ox, which obviously isn't true, but what it means is that your ox is continuing to do damage even though it's not physically next to my ox. But she can say to Ruth, look, your ox causes damage and this damage continues to be relevant because my animal is deteriorating as a result of it. And then it would make sense that we're going to make Ruth pay for that. Okay, so basically we've now managed to explain all 4 cases of that braita. Okay, moving now to another Mishna. And this is all going to be based on 2 different interpretations of a very complicated pasuk, which we've actually mentioned before, but now we're really going to learn it. So I'll read the pasuk first. Shemot, chapter 21, verse 35. Shor time, basic law of shor time. How do you pay damages for shor time? He gof shor ish et shor re'ehu. Okay, so one ox gores another. Umeit, okay, and the animal dies. Umachru et shor hachai v'chatzu et kaspo. They sell the live animal and they split it 50-50 between them, right? Okay, this would be in a case where the damage was equal to exactly half the animal, the damage. V'gam et hamet yachatzu. And also the dead animal, they're going to split in half. Okay, now what does that mean? Why would they split the dead animal in half? So we're going to see 2 different interpretations of how to read that line. So the Mishna starts off with Rabbi Meir. We're going to say machloket Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. Shor shaveh 200, shenagach shor shaveh 200, ve'ena nevela yafa klum. Okay, so we have one worth 200, the other worth 200. One damages the other. Animal's dead, no value to the carcass. It's done 200 worth of damage. Amar Rabbi Meir. That's a classic example. That's what I said. When both are worth the same, and then one is worth nothing now. So since they were both worth the same, they were both 200, and now we split the value of the one who's still alive. And half, and how do we split? We sell the animal, and half goes to Ruth, stays with Ruth, half goes to pay Naomi. That's what Rabbi Meir said this pasuk is talking about. That's what it means. You sell the live animal, and you split the money. Notice he doesn't talk about the next words. He ignores those words, which we're going to get to. Rabbi Yehuda, you're right that that's the halacha. Then in that case, Naomi will get 100. But, right, that's basic shor time, half damages. And there's enough in Ruth's animal to give half damages. But you explained that part of the pasuk. But you didn't explain that part of the pasuk. And Ezeh, and he says, that's not, so I agree with you, la halacha, but that's not the classic case talked about in the Torah. The Torah was talking about a case like this. It was 200 that attacked the 200, but the carcass was still worth 50. There is value to the carcass. There's obviously value to the carcass in the Torah pasuk because it's talking about splitting the carcass. So, okay, how does this work? Ruth and Naomi each get half. They sell, okay, what they do is they sell both animals. They sell the carcass of the dead animal. They sell the live animal, and each gets half of each. So that means that Ruth gets her half of 100. Naomi gets 100. Then of the dead nevela, the 50, Ruth gets 25 and Naomi gets 25, and each one ends up with 125, which in the end means that Ruth paid 75, which is half the damage, because the damage was 150, because it was worth 200 and went down to 50. So the damage was 150, 75. So he doesn't disagree with Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Meir would just say, right, that 100, right, in this case, you would basically sell Ruth's ox, and she would have to pay only 75 because that's half the damage. Now, they both in the end say that Ruth pays 75, but it's done in a different way. And the question is going to be later, obviously, what's the difference? Whether you say it's this, you say it's that, either which way Ruth paid 75. What's the difference if the carcass gets split in half or not? Okay, so we'll talk about that. So basically, in simple terms, Rabbi Meir says the whole payment comes from Ruth's ox. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, no, we also split the nevela up. So basically, she'll get more of Ruth's ox than she's really deserving of, but Ruth will also get some of the dead carcass. So the carcass, in which case they'll end up with the same amount of money, but it's split up differently. Okay, so we're going to have to see what the relevance is. But right now, what we want to understand is what does Rabbi Meir do with Gamma Tamed Yachitzun? So for that purpose, the Gemara is going to bring a bright. Tanu Rabbanan, shor shaveh 200, shenagach shor shaveh 200, v'nevela yafeh 50 zuz. That's the case Rabbi Yehuda said. I'm going to start with Rabbi Yehuda. 200 caused 150 of damage to a shor that was worth 200. The carcass is 50. Zenotel chatzi achai b'chatzi amet. Zenotel chatzi achai b'chatzi amet. Each one gets half of each. V'zeh shor hamor b'torah divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And that's what the case was talking. The case that the Torah spoke about. Rabbi Meir omer ein zehu shor hamor b'torah. That is not the case the Torah was talking about. Ela. The Torah was talking about shor shaveh 200, shenagach l'shor shaveh 200, ve'eina nevela yafeh klum. Exactly the case he said in the Mishna. Each was worth 200, and the half of the shor that was alive fits perfectly with the amount of damages. Gets half. And nothing, there is no nevela to talk about. Now comes Rabbi Meir and he adds in this bright, Ela, mani mekayem, gam tamed yachitzun. What does this pasuk come to teach you? Comes to teach you something else, which is the amount. Okay, now this is a very complicated way of saying very simply, the amount of damage caused, right? You split from the live animal, which basically comes to say that if the live animal, by splitting it in half, it actually is more than half the damage caused to the other ox, then, right, if Ruth's ox is worth a lot more and damaged Naomi's with just a little bit of damage, then the half doesn't go to Naomi. She doesn't get half of Ruth's animal. She only gets the whatever damage was caused by the death of Naomi's animal will be machatzim b'chai, will be split, will be taken from half of the dead animal. Okay, so Ruth won't ever have to pay more than what damage she caused. Okay, so the commentaries explain what does that add, because machur shor chai could be, it could be, you would think that if let's say Ruth's ox was worth 200 and the damage she caused was 50, maybe you anyway split, right? Machur shor chai b'chatzur kaspo sounds like no matter what, she gets half of Ruth's ox, right? And she'll get 100, even though that wasn't the damage. So the second part comes to say, no, gamma tamed yachitzun, we have assessed the value based on the mate, based on what the damages that were incurred by the dead animal. And that's what he understands from that pasuk. And it won't be more than that. The very, very end of the sugya, we're going to have to come back and say, does Rabbi Yehuda think that you actually could pay more than the damages caused? Because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't explain it this way. And I'll just tell you at the end, we're going to get to the Rabbi Yehuda thinks both interpretations, because otherwise it really doesn't make sense. And what we're going to get to in general today is kind of saying Rabbi Yehuda can come to some very absurd conclusions. If we're going to split half the dead and half the live, we can have all sorts of bizarre cases that can't really be true. Okay, so now. Michti bein Rabbi Meir, bein Rabbi Yehuda, hai me'av 25 shekel, v'hai me'av 25 shekel, my benayu. And this goes back to the question I said before, which is, if you're going to get half the animal that's alive and half the animal that's dead, and each one's going to get 50-50, and we're talking about a case where it was worth 200, it damaged 150, and, right, the carcass is now worth 50, because it was 200 and now worth 50, and everyone's going to get 100 of that animal, 125 of that animal, and then they're each going to end up with 125 according to Rabbi Yehuda, and which means, right, that 75 damages of 75 zuz of damages was given to Naomi. It's the exact same thing that Rabbi Meir would say. Okay, what's the difference? 200 to 50, 150, split it in half, 75, and that's what Ruth's going to have to pay from her ox. Well, what's the difference? Okay, there's really no difference. In the end, everyone's going to end up with 125 in their pocket. So we're now going to have an answer, but we're going to reject this answer soon. Well, if the nevela goes down in value, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the nevela is split between the mazik and the nizak, right? So the mazik, Naomi, is going to take the mazik, Ruth, is going to take a loss on that also. If you say like Rabbi Meir, that no, Naomi gets half damages, right? And she's going to get 75, and she's going to keep her own nevela. Now, you might remember we learned about pchat nevela. We learned about it in a shor muad case. In the shor muad case, and this is very important for the continuation, so pay attention. Pchat nevela, if it's a regular case and it's full damages, and let's say, so the Ruth's ox damaged 150 shekel zuz worth of Naomi's ox. It was worth 200, now it's worth 50. She pays full damages 150, not relevant to what her shor was worth. She pays 150. And if you remember, it says in the Torah, the nevela stays with Naomi. So if the nevela went down in value from the time that the ox gored to the time that we're in judgment here, that it doesn't matter. If it's now worth 30 only, the loss is on Naomi, because it says in the pasuk, she keeps the nevela stays with Naomi. It's only Naomi's. Here in this case, Rabbi Yehuda says, what do you mean? They each split the nevela. So that means that the nevela goes down in value, Ruth is going to take a loss on the nevela also, which actually comes to something absurd, which we're going to see in a minute, which is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the rules for a shor time are more strict than the rules for a shor muad, which is never the case. Or maybe it is. We're going to talk about that, okay? Because again, shor muad, the nevela stays with Naomi and she takes the loss, not Ruth who caused the damage. According to Rabbi Yehuda here in a short time, Ruth gets half the nevela. So if the nevela went down, Ruth's going to end up with less, right? In our case, we ended up, everyone had 125. But if the animal went down from 50 to 30, everyone's going to end, right? If the carcass dropped in value by the time we have that, everyone's going to get 115 instead of 125. Ruth is going to actually have a loss. So that's what we're going to say right now. So Rabbi Meir says, it's all Naomi because Ruth has no connection to the nevela. That's not how he reads the pasuk. Rabbi Yehuda savar pchat nevela de mazik have palka. The mazik shares in the loss of the nevela. So Amalei Abaye, according to what you're saying, it's absurd. In Kematzinu Rabbi Yehuda, as I mentioned before, tam chamor mi muad, turning now to amabet. You're going to basically say the shor time is a stricter law than a shor muad, because a shor muad, if Ruth's ox gores and was a forewarned shor, she doesn't take any loss if the nevela drops in value from the time of the death of the animal. But if it's a short time she is, that sounds ridiculous. And if you want to say, maybe not so ridiculous, okay, maybe it could happen. Well, why would we think it could be? And this is a case we're not going to have time to delve into, but I'll just quote it and we'll learn it later, which is Keditnan. It's going to come up on Daf Mem Hey. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, here's proof for maybe a short time. Sometimes the law is more strict. As always, if you want to say, it will be rejected. Tam chayav muad patur. Okay, they really don't tell you anything. What we're talking about here is if I'm watching your shor, I can either be watching a shor that's a short time, or I can be watching a shor that's a shor muad. Okay, you gave me your shor to watch. I'm responsible for damages of that animal, but depends if it's a short time or a shor muad. If the shor is a short time, I'm liable. If the shor is a shor muad, I'm actually exempt. It's a very bizarre. Seems like it would be the opposite, right? Wouldn't you think I'd be more responsible if you had a shor muad? I have to watch it better. As if I did basic shmirah. Let's say I assume I put up a gate and somehow the ox knocked down the gate and went out. Okay. So if I did my basic shmirah that I should have done, I'm exempt if it was a shor muad. I'm liable if it's a short time. Why that is a bit hard to understand. The Meir gives an explanation that shor muad, everyone knows about a shor muad, and therefore it's more the responsibility of the people to, as long as I did my own shmirah, also other people do their own shmirah to protect from the shor muad, so they all know it's a shor muad. So because it was testified against in court a few times, it gets around, and because of that, maybe it makes me less liable. But anyway, that's just a halacha. Let's just take it at face value right now. We'll deal with it in about 11 days. The point being, there is some sort of a precedent where a tam will have a more strict halacha than a muad, but that's only in that unique case, and because it's learned from a pasuk there, okay? Because there it says by a shor muad lo yishmerenu ba'alav. If you didn't watch it, which means if you did watch it, then you're exempt. And here he did watch it. He just, something happened, but he did his basic shmirah. So anyway, that's a unique drasha by shmirah about watching. But when it comes to payments, nobody distinguishes and says a shor tam has to pay in more cases than a shor muad. That would be ridiculous. And we're going to see how we know that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold that way. But Hatanya, there's a braita that says, Rabbi Yehuda omer, Yachol shor shaveh minei, shenagach shor shaveh chamesh slim. This is going to get a little bit tricky, not so, but they're now comparing minei, which is zuzim, okay, or dinarim, to slaim, which is a different currency, okay, or a different coin. What's a sela? The main thing you have to remember is a sela is 20 zuz. So we have a shor that's 100 that attacks a shor that's worth 20. Okay, it's a bit of an extreme case. You'll see. V'hanvela yafa sela. The 20 went down to 1 sela, which is 4 zuz. So basically, we have a shor that was 100 that caused damage of 16 zuz. Because it was 20, it went down to 4. That's the main thing you need to know. Shor is 100, attacked a shor that's worth 6, that attacked in damages that came out to 16. Okay, now, according to this, let's go to what a shor muad would pay. It's very simple. A shor muad would pay, right? How many caused 16 zuz worth of damage? So a shor muad would pay 16. So now Rabbi Yehuda says, if you take my halacha to the extreme, what will you get to a case like this? So if the shor was 100 and damaged 16, now if we say we split 50-50, both the animal that's alive and the animal that's dead. So let's do the math. The 100 gets split 50-50. The 16 gets, the 4 zuz gets split 50-50. So everybody gets 50 of the shor that's alive and 2 zuz of the shor that's dead. So now everybody ends up with 52. Now, why is that absurd? Because the shor tam, okay, Naomi, whose ox got injured, started with a shor that was worth 20 and now ends up with 52. That's a little crazy, right? So, Amarta, and if it was a shor muad, so now, as a shor tam, according to Rabbi Yehuda, she'll get 52 zuz, right? As opposed to her 16 zuz of damages. If she was a shor muad, she gets 16. So comes Rabbi Yehuda and he says, Amarta b'chi muad lama yotzei. Why was there a unique exception made in the Torah for a shor muad? Lachmir alav or lakel alav? Was it to be more strict with the owner or more lenient with the owner? To which he says, Heve omer lachmir alav. Of course it was to be more strict with the owner. Uma muad no mashalem alamashi zik. Well, a muad for sure only pays what they damage. So here it would be 16. Tam hakal lo kol shaken. So of course a tam is not going to get more than 16 worth of damage. So this is ridiculous. So therefore, basically what we're going to say is it's clear that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think. Now, the main point we brought this was, okay, he says, in that case, obviously you're not going to get 52. Okay, he's not going to end up with 52 zuz worth of, 50 payment from Mr. Mazik here. But basically what you see here is that Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that we can't have the tam being more strict than the muad, which means the pchat nevela cannot be the difference between them. Because pchat nevela, again, let's go through facts. Pchat nevela, if it's a shor muad, and Ruth's ox gored Naomi's ox, and then Naomi's ox deteriorates over time before the din and is worth less, right? Because the nevela has been sitting around, it stinks or whatever it is, Ruth is not going to have to pay any more. The pchat nevela is on the nizak, because that's from a pasuk in the Torah. So we're not going to be more machmir here and say, oh, well, according to Rabbi Yehuda, since the nevela gets split 50-50, the depreciation is going to also go on Ruth. Can't possibly be. So therefore, that's not the difference between them. Ella Amar Rabbi Yochanan, shevach nevela. The difference is Ruth going to actually benefit from the fact that if the nevela goes up in value, Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, well, since the nevela gets split 50-50, if it went up in value, Ruth will benefit. Okay? Now, right? According to Rabbi Meir, Ruth has no place of getting the nevela. So basically, the nevela is going to end up only in Naomi's hands, and she'll benefit from the fact that the nevela went up in value. Umar Savar, Rabbi Yehuda says, Palga, they're going to split the value of the increase. And that's going to be our answer. And we're now going to prove it by bringing in a source. We're really only the first line is necessary. We're going to prove that it's clear that Rabbi Yehuda holds this way. But we're going to bring in anyway an interesting braita, which is going to talk about taking Rabbi Yehuda the extreme again, okay, which is what we did before. And basically say, you can't take Rabbi Yehuda the extreme, okay, with limitations. And this is what Rabbi Yehuda was struggling with when he said the following thing. Okay, Okay, this is it. That's the line you need. After this, we could stop. But we're not going to stop because they bring the whole thing. But this is the important line. Since you said that the Torah had rachmanut, okay, was nice to Ruth and gave her the shevach of the nevela, that's why it says, chatzu et hamet hachai. I'm sorry, chatzu et hamet gam et hamet yachatzun. Also, Ruth is going to benefit even from the nevela going up in value. That proves that that's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. And Rabbi Meir obviously doesn't hold that because he thinks the nevela stays in the hands of Naomi. So now, but here comes the interesting line, which has nothing to do, we've done what we brought it for. However, since you say that the Torah was compassionate with Ruth to allow her to take this extra payment, yeah, right, the extra up in value, Yachol, you might have thought maybe we can even be more nice to the mazik. Now, it's a little weird that we're being nice to the mazik in general, but we know that some of the things, right, the mazik does get benefits for. So, Yachol shor shaveh chamesh lien. We're going to do some math again. If a shor that's worth 20, gores a shor that was shaveh maneh, okay, worth a lot more than it is, okay? So, worth 100. Vanvelai yafeh 50 zuz. Okay, so Ruth's ox, which is only worth 20, gored Naomi to the extent that it went down from 100 to 50, so caused 50 worth of damage. And the nevela is now worth 50. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? We split the nevela, right? And we split the animal of Ruth. So let's do the math. We started off, Ruth had an animal of 20 and caused damage worth 50. So now we're going to split Ruth's animal, 10, everyone's going to get 10. We're going to split the dead animal, which is 50. Everyone's going to get 25. Everyone's going to end up with how much? 35. Now Ruth starts out with 20. And she ends with 35, she wins out here, right? She actually gains from the fact that her ox gored. That would be absurd, obviously. So let's read it inside. Amalta, but if you're going to say that, Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, right, that since we're nice to Ruth and we let her get the increase of the nevela, could we go this far as to say that she could really get more money than she started with? Amarita, so we're going to say basically no way, no how. First of all, how could you ever have a case where the one who injured is actually going to end up with more money than they started with? And it says Ruth has to pay, which means she doesn't get paid. So there's no way this would be the case. So the Gemara wants to just know, since we already got into this and it's so interesting, why do you need the second claim? Why would it be enough to just say, certainly Ruth isn't going to benefit? Why do you have to say also she can't take anything? Well, in this case, the nizak would lose out because the nizak is going to get 35 instead of, right, they got damaged. Well, the truth is they would still get damaged, but at least the nizak gets something, okay? But what about a case, here there would be a pseda l'nizak, but like, for example, if the nizak wouldn't lose anything, if both gain, okay, both are going to gain and end up with more. How would that be? Well, you have to be creative here. So, shor shaveh chamesh lien, shenagach shor shaveh chamesh lien. They're both worth 20. Okay. Now, hanevela yafash loshim zuz. But then what happens? The nevela, okay, you could have a case where dead animals are worth more than live animals. Okay. First of all, you have to slaughter it. You have to deal with them. You have to this. Maybe it's actually worth 30. Okay. Now, or kill it in this case. It's not slaughtered properly. But whatever it is, it actually upped in value by being killed. Okay, maybe we're in a society where, at that time, slaughtered animals are worth more than live animals. So, in this case, the animal goes up. Now, shakil nami mazik b'shivcha. You might say, look, what's going to happen? So, 10 of the live one, and 15 of the dead one. Everyone's going to end up with 25. In this case, both the nizak and the mazik are going to end up with more than they started. So, since the nizak's getting more, maybe, in the other case, the nizak actually ended up with less. They only got 35 when the damage was 50. But if the nizak's going to get more, they only started with 20 and now they're getting 25. And then Ruth maybe will get the extra 5 also. Well, then you needed to add the extra v'shalei nishalei. Okay, that might say maybe he could be niskal as long as the other guy also wins out. But then it says shalei mishalei ba'alim mishalei ve'em ba'alim notzim. There's no way, no how we're going to do this case. Ruth is not going to get more than she started with. But there's something still that doesn't really work with Rabbi Yehuda. If we say if we follow that strictly, which already we saw we don't really follow it strictly. But if we follow it strictly, if you're going to always get half the live and half the dead, you can end up with cases where you're going to pay more than half damages. So how could that be? So to which they answer, eat Layla Rabbi Yehuda, and I told you in the beginning where we're going to get to this, the payment is going to max out at half the damage. In other words, we're going to evaluate it based on half the damage that was caused to the dead animal. Now, what's the problem, though? Where was that learned from by Rabbi Meir? He agrees with Rabbi Meir. The problem is that Rabbi Meir learned it from the whole pasuk where Rabbi Yehuda got his opinion from. Basically means you're not going to get more than half the damages caused to the dead animal. But it also means, according to Rabbi Yehuda, both that and the fact that you're going to split the nevela, and the shevach nevela is going to also go. So he's going to now say we can get two things out of that pasuk. Why? Because it says, because of the word, and also, we're going to learn, there's two things you can learn from that pasuk. So in the end, Rabbi Yehuda does cap it. Okay, what we saw today was Rabbi Yehuda has a bit of a weird position, which could get to crazy circumstances, which we say, no, it doesn't apply in the crazy circumstances. There's limitations to his words. Okay, let's do the Mishnah. You could have the same action that was done by a person, damage, or done by an ox. Damage is caused by an ox. And yet you could have a case where you're liable if the shor did it, exempt if the person did it, or liable if the person did it and exempt if the shor did it. So now we're going to have to see the cases. We're going to start with the case, Ketzad, shoro shebiyesh patur, v'hu shebiyesh chayav. If a shor humiliates someone on the street, let's say a shor urinates on someone in the street, it's a huge embarrassment, but it's no damage caused, it's just embarrassment. Well, the owner of the shor doesn't pay for embarrassment, because embarrassment we assume is intentional, and shors don't have intent to damage, to embarrass. So if a human does it, they'd be liable. But if a shor did it, they wouldn't be. If a shor blinds the eye of a slave or the tooth, he's exempt. But but a person would be liable for those damages. Now we're going to get to the reverse cases. A shor that attacks a mother and father of the owner will be liable. The owner will be liable. But if he injures his mother and father, he's exempt. Now, why is he exempt? Not because it's not a terrible thing, but do you remember this? He's liable to the death penalty. And if you're liable to the death penalty, there's a principle, minei. You don't pay money when you're supposed to get the death penalty, even if you don't actually get the death penalty. And likewise for the next one. If a shor lights a field on fire on Shabbat, so obviously the owner's chayav, because his shor caused damage. But if you do it on Shabbat, you get the death penalty. If you get the death penalty, you're exempt from payment. Okay, we're going to stop here and start with the Gemara on this. It opens a whole other sugya that goes back to Masechet Shabbat. But the basic idea here is not exactly as it seemed in the beginning, that we're going to be more lenient on a person. It's because we're strict on the person and they get the death penalty, they're going to actually be exempt from payment. With the shor, we're going to say sometimes the shor does something that they're not actually liable for, but a human would be liable. Okay, so we're always going to hold a human more accountable, even though it sounds like from the beginning of the Mishnah, maybe not. It's just, it comes out this way because of this principle of kim lebe derabba minei, that we always give someone the harsher punishment. So quick summary, we started with finishing up that braita about what happens to this, how does migufo work, to what extent do we say it, right? What can be done with that animal, and how much is it mishuabad to that payment, which the answer is very much so. And then we talked about what if the animal goes up and down in value? What if the animal of Ruth? What if the animal of Naomi? We talked about both. Then we got to this Mishnah about what's the real case in the Torah. What does that mean? What does it come to teach you? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. And then we went to basically limit Rabbi Yehuda, because we could really get to some absurd circumstances from his opinion that, the nevela goes to, right? First we talk about what's the nafkamina, what's the difference in the halacha, and that shor time cannot be more strict than shor muad. So we had to limit that. Then we just ended with this comparison about the shor and the adam, that sometimes one could be liable and the other one is not. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everybody a good day, hoping for good news today.